An escalating war of words after Iran shoots down an American drone. Reports have emerged that Donald Trump ordered a strike on the Islamic Republic in the late hours of Thursday and then called it off abruptly. The Tory leadership race, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt are the final two in the battle to be Britain's next Prime Minister. We'll be bringing you the latest developments. Also coming up this hour on France 24, European leaders failed to reach a deal on top EU jobs. A special summit is now scheduled for June the 30th, where they will try and break the deadlock. Well, those are our top stories this hour on France 24. I'm Sanam Shantier. Thank you for watching. Now, reports have emerged this Friday that the US military made preparations for limited strikes on Iran. This in retaliation for the downing of an American surveillance drone a day earlier, as seen in these images. Planes were in the air and ships were in position, but approval was abruptly withdrawn before the attacks were launched. Meanwhile, several airliners have confirmed, including Lufthansa, that they'll no longer fly over the Strait of Hormuz, where the incident took place. Clément Bonnerot brings us up to speed.
Do you still hold that opinion?
An abrupt change of plans. The New York Times says preparations for limited strikes on Iran were in their early stages when President Donald Trump pulled back at the last minute. Planes were in the air and ships were in position, but no missiles had been fired when word came to stand down, a White House official was quoted as saying. It's not yet clear whether President Trump changed his mind or called off the operation because of logistics or strategy. The aborted strikes were in response for the downing of a US Navy drone by Iran on Thursday, an attack that Trump had earlier downplayed, suggesting it could have been caused by human error.
I have a feeling that it was a mistake made by somebody that shouldn't have been doing what they did. I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid that did it.
Thursday's attack is the latest incident between the two countries, which have been at odds since Donald Trump's decision last year to pull out of a landmark nuclear deal and reimpose crippling economic sanctions on Iran. Tehran says it has indisputable evidence that the RQ-4 drone, similar to the one seen here, violated its airspace and was justifiably targeted at the location shown by the Revolutionary Guard. Washington, however, maintains that the drone was in international airspace over the Strait of Hormuz at the time. The recent escalation has prompted fears of a full-blown war between Iran and the US, the UN calling on both sides for maximum restraint.
Now, for analysis, I'd like to bring in our international affairs editor, Armin Georgian. Armin, thank you so much for joining us. It is a difficult question to ask. Just how close are we to potentially the brink of war?
Well, if these strikes had actually gone ahead, then I suppose we would have been closer to war. But remember, a decision to go to war involves different levels of government on both sides. It's not just Trump and Bolton who decide, just as it's not simply Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guard. And these discussions in Washington involved quite a few different centers of power, including the Pentagon and the CIA and congressional leaders. So in the course of those discussions, Donald Trump would almost certainly have been told that Iran is not Syria. You remember he ordered strikes on Syria twice, and he saw that there was not much reaction from Damascus. But this time around, he would almost certainly have been told Iran would respond, and no one could predict exactly what that response would be. So the broader these kinds of discussions are, the national security discussions, the more chance there is of somebody in the room saying, hang on a minute, you know, if Y doesn't follow from X, then what do we do? How could we be wrong on this? So it seems that there were probably enough different elements in the room or in the discussions to actually stop this going further.
And of course, the higher the tensions are, there is more possibility, as we've heard from both sides, that there could be a miscalculation that leads to confrontation. Now, Armin, There is an element of surprise, it appears, that Trump's Iran policy has backfired. Is there really a strategy? Is there a policy that is currently in place, do you think?
A strategy, I think, needs to have a clear goal and an effective path towards achieving that goal. And you could argue with the US approach that both of those elements are missing. So on the nature of the goal, what does the US ultimately want? Is it regime change, or is it to make the Iranian leadership negotiate? The US has sent mixed signals on that. And as far as an effective path is concerned, well, you have to ask, is this path effective? Is withdrawing from the nuclear deal and waging what the Iranian leadership calls economic war on the Iranian people, are those two things effective? Have they actually forced the Iranian leadership to negotiate with the US? No. Have they diminished Iran's military reach in the region? That's debatable. But in any case, a lot of veterans of the US national security and foreign policy scene say they don't really see a coherent strategy at the moment coming from the White House.
Armin Jordan, thank you so much for that analysis. Turning our attention to the Tory leadership runoff, Jeremy Hunt will fight Boris Johnson after he clinched a place on the final ballot of 2 to be put to the party's members. This comes after Michael Gove and Sajid Javid were eliminated on Thursday. Here's France 24's Laurent Berstecker with a look at Jeremy Hunt's career.
He's been cast as the safe option for Britain. And while that may have more to do with his rival's unpredictability than with his own character, Jeremy Hunt's 14-year-long political career, including 9 years in cabinet, speaks to the 52-year-old's resilience. Elected MP in 2005, Hunt's first ministerial post came in 2010 when he was named Culture Secretary, a 2-year stint during which he oversaw the London Olympics. In 2012, he was appointed Health Secretary, a position generally seen as a graveyard for British ministers, but which Hunt held for a record 6 years. His biggest test there came after his proposal to impose contracts on junior doctors led to a massive strike. Hunt refused to back down, alienating large parts of the medical community, but showcasing his tough negotiating skills. In 2018, Hunt succeeded Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, and while he was criticized for sanctioning arms sales to Saudi Arabia, he was also praised for his role in setting up Yemen peace talks. Described as thoroughly nice and a decent chap by his entourage, many conservatives doubt the soft-spoken Hunt is ruthless enough for the role of Prime Minister. A former Remainer turned hard Brexiteer, he's also been criticized for lacking strong convictions, yet he's seen as more sensible than his rival Boris Johnson and less likely to sanction a no-deal Brexit, a scenario which he has himself described as political suicide.
Moving on, European Union leaders are set to meet again on June the 30th after failing to agree on who should take the bloc's top jobs for the next 5 years. Talks held in Brussels continued until the early hours of Friday morning without candidates being finalised. The 3 lead contenders failed to receive enough support from the EU's member states. Clément Bonnereau has that report.
The race is on to replace Jean-Claude Juncker, but the president of the European Commission will have to wait at least 1 more week before he finds out who succeeds him.
I've noted with some pleasure, amusement, satisfaction, joy even, that it appears it's not that easy to replace me.
European Union leaders met in Brussels on Thursday but failed to agree on who should take on the bloc's top post. The president of the European Commission is normally chosen through a process known as Spitzenkandidat, the German word for lead candidate. It means that the candidate of the largest political party in parliament should get the job. In theory, that would mean Germany's Manfred Weber from the centre-right European People's Party. French President Emmanuel Macron, however, says this process is unworkable. This after last month's elections left the EU Parliament more fragmented than ever.
The names of the three leading candidates, the so-called Spitzenkandidaten, were tested by Donald Tusk, and he considered there was no majority on either of those three names.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel, meanwhile, has defended the process. A new summit will be held on the 30th of June to try to break the deadlock. It will take place 2 days before the new parliament begins its opening session.
Our common position is that we absolutely need an agreement before the new parliament convenes and chooses its president.
Besides the replacement for Jean-Claude Juncker, other top jobs up for grabs include Speaker of the European Parliament, President of the European Council, and Foreign Policy Chief.
Now, Georgian police fired rubber bullets and tear gas at protesters who were demanding snap parliamentary polls. The violent scenes come after a Russian lawmaker addressed the assembly from the speaker's seat, infuriating the country's opposition deputies. Booed by protesters, Sergei Gavrilov left, warning that Georgia will face consequences for that incident. The Russian Foreign Ministry, meanwhile, this Friday said that it will continue to improve its ties with Tbilisi.
Police in Georgia firing a volley of tear gas at protesters gathered outside the country's parliament after they attempted to storm the building earlier on Thursday. The protesters pushed against lines of riot police, throwing bottles and grabbing riot shields from some officers and tearing off their helmets. Some protesters had to be treated by paramedics at the scene. The unrest was triggered by the appearance of Russian legislator Sergei Gavrilov in parliament as part of a delegation from Orthodox Christian countries. During his appearance, he spoke in Russian while sat in the Georgian parliamentary speaker's seat. This then prompted protesters to gather outside the building in their tens of thousands.
I'm here to protest Russian involvement in the politics of my country. I'm here because I've been alive for 25 years and I haven't lived in a fully independent country yet, and that's all I really want.
I think that this is the expression of the peaceful expression of the protesto to show to the government that we will not tolerate Russian expansion to Georgia and we will not tolerate Russianization of the Georgia, which happening unfortunately under this government for the last 7 years.
Gavrilov has supported independence for the Georgian breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which Georgia lost control of in a 2008 war with Russia. He is also a supporter of Russian President Vladimir Putin, a figure despised by many Georgians.
It's time now for some football news and the biggest tournament in Africa, that's the Cup of Nations. Zimbabwe faces Egypt, the host nation, in the opening match this Friday, and Egypt happens to be the favourite to win. Here's a report from our team on the ground.
Zimbabwe's players seem to be keeping their cool ahead of their first group match, and they can afford to be confident after an impressive performance in the qualifiers. They topped their group, beating the Democratic Republic of Congo, who they'll soon be up against again. Zimbabwe are known as the Warriors, and they'll need to be ready to fight when they face hosts Egypt. But their coach is keeping positive.
We know it's not an easy match. We are playing against the home side, big crowd, and also the team is very good, one of the giants of Africa. So it's not going to be an easy match for us. But however, I think we are prepared and we're going to give it our best shot.
Up against seven-time champions Egypt, Zimbabwe are the underdogs. Previously, they've always come last in their group. It's only their fourth time competing in the tournament. Striker Tino Kadewere played in the last Cup of Nations in Gabon 2 years ago and has seen his team progress since then.
I think we have learnt a lot because we were there in Gabon and we played against bigger teams also. So I think we have gained a little bit more experience, and we're hoping that this time around it's going to be different, and we're hoping that we're going to do our best and make history, make Zimbabwe proud, make everyone in Zimbabwe happy.
After their match against Egypt, Zimbabwe will be up against the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. The Warriors will be aiming to at least get past the group stage for the first time. But their real ambition is to pull it out of the hat and battle to become the surprise champions of the tournament.
Now, we'll have special coverage of this tournament at 9:45 p.m. Paris time this evening, presented by France 24's Wassim Cornet. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. More news coming up with us very shortly.